Good evening, my little creatures of the night. Mr. Wendigo back again with your late night creature feature. Before we begin, I'm curious. Where are you listening from tonight? Alone in your room? Driving through empty roads? Drop a comment and let me know. I like knowing who's out there in the dark with me. Now then, let's see what tonight's tale brings us. The last broadcast. The thing about working the overnight shift at a dying AM radio station is that you get a lot of time to think about where your life went wrong. Owen Tate had narrowed it down to 3 solid options, and most nights he cycled through all of them before 2 in the morning. Tonight he was stuck on option 3, moving back to Derrick, Kansas, to take the only job that would have him. Overnight DJ at KDRK 1240 AM, the station that time forgot. The place where careers came to die, and apparently so did he. The building had been there since 1952, wood-paneled walls, carpet the color of dried mustard. The whole place smelled like cigarettes and dust, even though nobody had smoked inside in 20 years. Some smells just decide they live somewhere. Owen understood the feeling. His shift ran 10 to 6. 8 hours of monitoring automated playlists, reading farm reports to nobody, and trying not to fall asleep in a chair that had probably been uncomfortable when Eisenhower was president. The pay was garbage. The hours were worse. The only people who called in were insomniacs, drunks, and one guy named Leonard who wanted to talk about chemtrails every Thursday like clockwork. Owen had stopped arguing with Leonard around week 3. It was easier to just let him talk. Leonard was probably the most consistent relationship Owen had these days, which said something about his life that he didn't want to examine too closely. The worst part wasn't the isolation or the boredom or the slow, creeping certainty that his career had peaked at a job that paid $12 an hour to babysit a playlist. The worst part was the quiet. 8 hours of it, every night, broken only by the soft hum of equipment and the occasional creak of a building that was slowly settling into the earth. Owen had started talking to himself around month 2. By month 4, he'd given names to the ceiling tiles. Gerald was his favorite. Gerald had a water stain that looked like Abraham Lincoln if you squinted. He was 3 hours into Tuesday when the lights flickered. Not unusual. The wiring in this place was older than Owen's parents, but usually it was 1 flicker, maybe 2. This was a slow pulse, like something breathing. The overhead fluorescence dimmed, held, dimmed again. The equipment hummed a half-tone lower than normal. Owen felt the hair on his arm stand up, and for just a second the air tasted like pennies. Then it stopped. Everything snapped back to normal. "The hell," Owen muttered. He checked the board. All levels normal. The playlist was running. The transmitter readings looked fine. He leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling tiles, waiting for his heart to stop doing whatever it was doing. That's when Meredith Callahan walked in carrying a cardboard box and a problem. Meredith was the station manager, which sounded impressive until you realized managing KDRK was like being captain of a ship that had already hit the iceberg and just hadn't finished sinking yet. She was 62, built like a woman who'd spent those years refusing to take shit from anyone, and she had a voice made for radio back when that still meant something. She also never came in after 8 p.m., ever. In the 6 months Owen had worked here, he'd never once seen her set foot in the building during his shift. "Owen," she said, "I need you to do something for me." She set the box on the console. It was old water-stained cardboard, edges soft with age. No label except 3 words written in black marker, the handwriting shaky. "Do not air." "Found this in the basement," Meredith said. "I've been cleaning out the archive for the 70th anniversary thing. Most of it's garbage. Old promos, syndicated stuff nobody cares about anymore. But this box was in the back, behind the furnace, like someone hid it there." Owen looked at the box, looked at Meredith. "And you want me to, what?" "Digitize them. Whatever's on there, I want it transferred to the computer so we can listen without destroying the originals." She pulled back the cardboard flaps. Inside were reel-to-reel tapes, maybe a dozen of them, each one labeled with a date in the same shaky handwriting. "The dates are wrong, though. Must be some kind of code or filing system I don't understand." Owen leaned forward and looked at the labels. His stomach did something uncomfortable. The dates weren't wrong, they were future. The first tape was labeled October 17th. Today was October 14th. "These are dated ahead," he said. "I know, like I said, some kind of code. Maybe they recorded promos in advance and labeled them for air dates? I don't know. That's why I want you to digitize them. Figure out what they are." Meredith checked her watch. "I've got to get home. My hip's been killing me and I'm too old to be up this late. You know how to work the reel-to-reel?" "Yeah, Good. Get it done this week if you can. The anniversary broadcast is in 3 weeks, and I want to know what we're working with." She was already heading for the door. "And Owen? Don't put any of it on the air until I've reviewed it. Whatever's on those tapes, there's a reason someone wrote 'Do not air' on the box." She left. The door clicked shut behind her. Owen sat there in the dim light of the booth, looking at the box of tapes with future dates, and wondered if this was the universe's way of telling him his life could actually get weirder. He pulled out the first tape. October 17th, 3 days from now. The reel-to-reel machine was ancient but functional, a hulking piece of equipment that lived in the corner of the production room like a monument to a different era. Owen had used one exactly twice in his life, once in college, once at his old job when some client wanted a vintage sound for their commercial. He threaded the tape, checked the levels, and hit play. Static first, then a voice. It was a newscast, professional delivery, calm and measured, the kind of voice that used to mean something was official. The audio quality was decent but not modern, a little too warm, a little too analog. "Good evening. This is KDRK 1240 AM with your local forecast. The National Weather Service has issued a severe thunderstorm warning for Marshall County and surrounding areas. Expect heavy rainfall beginning Thursday evening, with possible tornado activity near County Road 12. Residents in low-lying areas are advised to seek shelter. Stay tuned for further updates." The tape ended. Static. Silence. Owen sat there for a long moment, staring at the machine. Thursday evening, County Road 12. He rewound the tape and played it again. Same broadcast, same warning, same specific details about a storm that hadn't happened yet, on a tape that had been sitting in a box behind a furnace God knows how long. "Okay," Owen said to the empty room. "Okay. That's weird. That's very weird. But it's probably just what? A coincidence? Someone had recorded a weather forecast, labeled it with the wrong date, and hidden it in a basement? That made no sense. Why would anyone do that?" He pulled out the next tape. October 19th, 5 days out. He threaded it, hit play. Static. Then the same voice, same professional delivery. "This is KDRK 1240 AM with a breaking news update. A fatal accident has been reported on Highway 56, approximately 2 miles east of Derrick. The victim has been identified as Dale Wexler, 54, owner of Wexler Hardware on Main Street. According to witnesses, Wexler's vehicle left the roadway at approximately 6:15 p.m. and struck a drainage culvert. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Our thoughts go out to the Wexler family during this difficult time." The tape ended. Owen's hands were shaking. He knew Dale Wexler. Everyone in Derrick knew Dale Wexler. The man had run the hardware store for 30 years. He'd sold Owen's father lumber for the back porch when Owen was 12. He was a fixture, a constant. And according to this tape dated 5 days from now, he was going to die on Highway 56 at 6:15 in the evening. "No," Owen said. "No, this is bullshit. Someone's messing with me. Meredith's messing with me. This is some kind of—" But Meredith didn't have a sense of humor. In 6 months, Owen had never once seen the woman smile at anything except news that the station had made budget for the quarter. He pulled out another tape, October 21st, a week away. This one described a house fire on Maple Street, the Henderson family, 3 dead, including 2 children. Owen stopped the tape. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely work the controls. He stood up from the console and walked to the window. Outside, Derrick was dark and quiet, the same as it always was at 1 in the morning. Streetlights made pools of orange on empty sidewalks. Nothing moved. Nothing was wrong. Except everything was wrong. Everything was completely wrong. He went back to the box and started pulling out tapes at random. October 25th, barn collapse at the Morrison farm, 2 injured. October 30th, gas leak at the elementary school, evacuated, no casualties. November 3rd, missing person report, teenager named Cody Vance, last seen near the grain elevator. Every tape was dated in the future. Every tape described something specific, something local, something that hadn't happened yet. Owen didn't sleep that night. He didn't even try. He sat in the booth and watched the automated playlist cycle through the same 30 songs it always played, and he thought about the tapes, and he tried to convince himself there was an explanation that made sense. He couldn't find one. Thursday came. Owen spent the day watching the sky. The morning was clear, sunny, not a cloud anywhere. By noon, Owen had almost convinced himself the whole thing was a hoax, some elaborate prank by someone with way too much time on their hands. The tape was wrong. The storm wasn't coming. Everything was fine. By 4 in the afternoon, the clouds started rolling in from the west. Dark ones, the kind that looked like bruises on the sky. By 5, the wind had picked up enough to rattle the windows in Owen's apartment. The local TV station broke into programming with a weather alert, severe thunderstorm warning. Marshall County and surrounding areas, heavy rainfall expected, possible tornado activity. Near County Road 12, Owen stood at his window and watched the storm come in. The rain started at 5:30, hard and sideways, drumming against the glass. Lightning cracked across the sky in bright white forks. The power flickered twice, 3 times, then held. The tornado touched down at 6:47 p.m. It carved a path across County Road 12, ripped up half a mile of farmland, took out a barn and 2 outbuildings. Nobody died. The families had heeded the warnings and gotten to their shelters, but the damage was exactly where the tape said it would be. Owen called in sick to work that night. He sat in his apartment with the lights off, listening to the storm die down, and he thought about Dale Wexler. October 19th, Highway 56, 6:15 p.m. He had 4 days. The next morning, Owen drove to Wexler Hardware. The store was open, same as always. The bell above the door jingled when Owen walked in, and Dale Wexler looked up from behind the counter with the same friendly expression he'd had for as long as Owen could remember. He was 54 years old, a little heavy around the middle, with a beard that had gone gray years ago and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. "Owen Tate," Dale said. "Haven't seen you in here in a while. What can I do for you?" Owen had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times on the drive over. None of the versions had sounded good. He decided to just say it. "Dale, I need to talk to you about something. It's going to sound crazy. Most things do these days. What's on your mind?" "I think," Owen stopped, started again. "I have reason to believe something bad is going to happen to you. On Saturday, on Highway 56. Dale's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted, got a little more guarded. "What kind of something bad?" "A car accident, a fatal one. And you know this how?" "I can't explain it, not in a way that makes sense, but I'm asking you, I'm begging you, don't drive on Highway 56 on Saturday, especially not around 6 in the evening. please." Dale was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Owen the way you look at someone you're trying to figure out, trying to decide if they're dangerous or just sad. "Owen," he said finally, "are you doing okay? I heard about the divorce, about the job in Kansas City. I know things have been rough. If you need someone to talk to..." "I'm not crazy, Dale. I know how this sounds, but I'm telling you the truth. Something bad is coming, and I don't want you to be part of it." Dale nodded slowly. "Okay. I appreciate the concern. I'll keep it in mind." He didn't believe him. Owen could see it in his face. Dale was humoring him, the way you humor someone who's clearly having some kind of episode. He'd probably call Meredith after Owen left. Ask if Owen had been acting strange at work, maybe suggest someone check on him. Owen left the hardware store feeling worse than when he'd walked in. Saturday came. Owen spent the day parked in his car across from Wexler Hardware, watching the front door like a crazy person, which, he supposed, he probably was at this point. Dale came and went twice, once to the diner for lunch, once to the bank. Both times, Owen followed at a distance, ready to do something, anything, if Dale headed toward Highway 56. At 5:30, Dale locked up the store and got in his truck. Owen followed. Dale drove east out of town, toward Highway 56. Owen's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He pressed the accelerator, pulled up alongside Dale's truck, and started honking, waving, trying to get him to pull over. Dale glanced over, saw Owen, and his expression went from confused to concerned to something that looked a lot like fear. He sped up. Owen sped up too. They were doing 60 now, then 65, the two vehicles racing down the county road toward the highway intersection. "Dale, stop!" Owen was screaming even though there was no way Dale could hear him. "Stop the truck, please." Dale didn't stop. He reached the intersection and turned onto Highway 56, heading east, away from town. Owen followed. 6:10 p.m., 5 minutes. Owen pulled alongside Dale again, still honking, still waving. Dale's face was pale now, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. He thought Owen was chasing him. Thought Owen was the danger. 6:13 p.m. Dale swerved to avoid Owen's car. The truck's tires caught the gravel shoulder, kicking up a spray of rocks and dust. The vehicle fishtailed hard to the left, then overcorrected to the right. Owen saw Dale fighting the wheel, saw his mouth moving in what might have been a prayer or a curse, saw the exact moment he realized he'd lost control. The truck left the road. Owen watched it happen in slow motion. The front wheels dropped into the drainage culvert and the whole vehicle pitched forward like it had been shoved by a giant hand. The truck hit the concrete culvert wall at 60 miles an hour. The front end crumpled inward, the hood folding back on itself, the engine block shoving backward into the cab. The windshield didn't shatter, it exploded, spraying glass across the ditch in a glittering arc. The cab compressed around Dale like a fist closing. The frame twisted, the doors buckled outward. The whole vehicle flipped once, twice, metal screaming against concrete, and came to rest upside down in the ditch with the wheels still spinning uselessly in the air. 6:15 p.m. Owen pulled over, got out, ran to the wreck. The smell hit him, first gasoline and hot metal and something else, something copper bright and wet. The truck's cab had been compressed to half its original size. The roof was pressed almost flat against the seats. Owen dropped to his knees in the mud and looked through the shattered driver's window. Dale Wexler was still in his seatbelt, hanging upside down, but there wasn't much left of him that looked like the man Owen had talked to 2 days ago. The steering column had punched through his chest, pinning him to the seat like an insect on a board. His ribcage had collapsed inward, the broken bones visible through his torn shirt. His head hung at an angle that necks weren't supposed to bend, the vertebrae clearly separated under the skin. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, already going cloudy. Blood dripped from his mouth, from his ears, from the dozen wounds where glass and metal had torn through him, pooling on the roof of the cab beneath him. His hand was still on the steering wheel, still gripping it, like he'd never let go. Owen had tried to save him, and in trying, he'd killed him. The tape had been right. The tape was always going to be right. He just hadn't understood how. He sat down in the ditch next to the wreck and stayed there until the sirens came. The police asked questions. Owen answered them. He told them he'd seen Dale's truck swerving, thought something was wrong, tried to help. They wrote it down. They didn't believe him. He could see it in their faces, but they couldn't prove anything, and there were no witnesses to contradict his story. The official report called it a single-vehicle accident, driver error, tragic but not suspicious. Owen knew the truth. The tape had predicted Dale's death, and Owen's attempt to prevent it had been the cause. He'd been the witness mentioned in the broadcast. He'd been the one who made Dale swerve. He went home and didn't leave his apartment for 2 days. On the 3rd day, he went back to the station. The box of tapes was still there, sitting on the console where he'd left it. Owen pulled out the October 21st tape, the house fire, the Henderson family. 3 dead, including 2 children. He wasn't going to let this one happen. He couldn't save Dale, but maybe if he did things differently, he could save them. He drove to Maple Street. The Henderson house was a 2-story colonial, white with green shutters, well-maintained lawn with one of those little garden gnomes by the front porch. There was a minivan in the driveway with a bumper sticker that said, "My kid is an honors student at Derrick Elementary," and a basketball hoop over the garage with a net that had seen better days. A normal house. A normal family. 2 kids, according to the tape. 2 children who were going to burn to death in 3 days if Owen didn't do something. He sat in his car for 10 minutes, trying to figure out what to say. "Hi, I'm the overnight DJ from the radio station nobody listens to, and I'm here to tell you your house is going to burn down because a tape from the future told me so. Yeah, that would go over great." But he tried doing nothing with Dale. He tried being vague. Neither approach had worked. Maybe the only way was to just be direct and hope they thought he was crazy enough to take seriously. He knocked on the door. A woman answered, mid-30s, tired eyes, flour on her apron like she'd been baking something. She had the look of a mom who'd been running on caffeine and willpower for about 6 years straight. She looked at Owen with the polite wariness of someone who wasn't expecting visitors and was calculating how quickly she could close the door if he turned out to be selling something. "Can I help you?" "Mrs. Henderson? My name is Owen Tate. I work at KDRK, the radio station. I need to talk to you about something important. It's about your house." "My house?" Her eyes flicked past Owen to the street, like she was checking if there was a news van or a police car or something that would explain why a stranger was on her porch talking about her house. "I have reason to believe there's a problem with your electrical system. A serious one, a dangerous one. I think you should have it inspected as soon as possible." The woman's expression shifted, less wary, more confused, with just a hint of that look people get when they're wondering if they should call the police. "Our electrical system? We just had an inspection 6 months ago. Everything was fine." "Please," Owen said. He could hear how desperate he sounded, how crazy. "I know this sounds strange. I know you don't have any reason to trust me. But I'm asking you, I'm begging you, get another inspection. Check the wiring in your walls. Check behind the kitchen outlets especially. And if you smell smoke, if you see anything wrong, get out immediately. Don't wait. Don't try to save anything. Just get your family out." Mrs. Henderson stared at him for a long moment. Her hand was still on the door, ready to close it. Owen could see her making a decision, weighing the cost of humoring a potential lunatic against the cost of ignoring him if he turned out to be right. "How do you know about the kitchen?" she asked quietly. Owen blinked. "What?" "The kitchen. You said to check behind the kitchen outlets especially. How did you know that's where—" She stopped. took a breath. We've been having problems with the lights in the kitchen. Flickering. My husband said it was probably just the bulbs, but... Call someone today, Owen said. Please, right now if you can. She called someone that afternoon. The electrician found a fault in the wiring behind the kitchen wall, a slow burn that had been building for months, invisible behind the drywall, eating through insulation that should have lasted another decade. The wires were hot to the touch when he pulled them out. Another week, maybe less, and they would have sparked. The kind of spark that catches insulation, that spreads through old walls faster than you can dial 911, the kind that fills a house with smoke before anyone even knows there's a fire. The Henderson family didn't die. The two kids, a boy and a girl, 8 and 6, Owen learned later didn't burn in their beds. Mrs. Henderson called the station the next day to thank him. She wanted to know how he'd known. Owen told her it was just a feeling, told her he was glad they'd listened, told her to have a good life and keep the smoke detectors fresh. He hung up the phone and sat in his car outside their house and cried until he couldn't breathe. He'd changed something. He'd actually changed something. But the relief didn't last, because now Owen had to know what else was on those tapes, what else was coming, and if he could change some things, did that mean he had to try to change all of them? He went back to the station that night and pulled out every tape in the box. There were 14 of them. He played them one by one, taking notes, building a timeline, storms, accidents, fires, missing persons. A slow cascade of small disasters stretching out over the next 2 months. Most of them were survivable, preventable, the kind of things that could be changed if someone knew they were coming. But the last tape was different. It was dated December 3rd, 6 weeks away. Owen threaded it with shaking hands and hit play. Static, then his own voice. This is KDRK, 12:40 a.m. with an emergency broadcast. A mass casualty event has occurred in downtown Derrick. Emergency services are responding to reports of multiple fatalities near the intersection of Main Street and 4th Avenue. Initial reports suggest. His voice cracked, broke, came back weaker. Initial reports suggest at least 30 dead. The cause is unknown at this time. Witnesses describe a long pause. When his voice returned, it was barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I tried to warn them. I tried to stop it, but nobody listened. They never listen. And now, static. The tape ended. Owen sat there in the dark, listening to the hiss of dead air, and felt something cold settle into his chest. That was his voice, not someone imitating him. A version of him that existed 6 weeks in the future, recording a broadcast about a disaster that killed 30 people in his hometown. He played the tape again, and again, each time hoping he'd hear something different, some detail he'd missed, some clue about what was coming and how to stop it. There was nothing, just his own voice, broken and sorry, describing the aftermath of something terrible. Owen started digging. He went back to the box, looking for tapes he might have missed. There weren't any. 14 tapes, 14 dates, and the December 3rd recording was the last one. But the box had been in the basement for years, maybe decades. If someone had been making these tapes all along, there had to be more somewhere. He found the basement key on Meredith's desk. The stairs down were narrow and dark, the kind of stairs that made you feel like you were descending into something that didn't want you there. The light switch at the top did nothing. The bulb had burned out years ago, apparently, and nobody had bothered to replace it. Owen used his phone flashlight, the thin beam cutting through darkness that felt thicker than it should have been. The basement itself was a maze of old equipment, filing cabinets, boxes of promotional materials from decades past. Owen passed a stack of vinyl records that had probably been worth something once. A broken transmitter the size of a refrigerator. A desk that had been down here so long it had started to grow mushrooms in the drawer. The whole place smelled like mold and rust and something else, something older, stranger, like the air itself had been sitting still for too long, like it had been waiting. His phone buzzed. No signal. Obviously he was underground, but the screen flickered anyway, just once, just enough to make him stop and stare at it. He kept moving. Owen found the furnace in the back corner. It was ancient, a hulking cast-iron beast that probably predated the building itself, covered in a layer of dust so thick it looked like gray fur. And behind the furnace, pushed into a gap between the wall and the ductwork, he found more boxes. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Each one labeled with a year, 1953, 1967, 1982, all the way up to the present, stacked in neat rows that disappeared into the darkness beyond his flashlight's reach. Owen pulled out a box at random 1974 and opened it. Tapes, dozens of tapes, each one dated, each one labeled in that same shaky handwriting he'd seen on the Do Not Air box. He pulled one out and read the label. May 17th, 1974, the tornado that killed 8 people. He remembered reading about it in the local history section of the library when he was a kid. One of the worst disasters in county history. He opened another box. 1979, the factory fire that killed 3 workers and hospitalized a dozen more. 1983, the flood that washed out the bridge on County Road 7 and drowned 2 teenagers who tried to cross anyway. Every disaster that had ever hit Derrick was here, recorded in advance, stored in boxes that nobody had opened in decades. Owen felt his legs go weak. He sat down on a crate of old promotional records and tried to breathe. Someone had been doing this for over 70 years, recording broadcasts about events that hadn't happened yet, labeling them with dates, storing them in the basement, and every single prediction had come true. But that wasn't the part that made Owen's blood run cold. The part that made his blood run cold was the voice. He pulled out a tape from 1953, the oldest box he could find, threaded it into the portable player he'd brought down with him, hit play. Static, then a voice. It was a newscast, professional delivery, calm and measured, describing a grain silo explosion that killed 4 workers on a date 2 weeks after the tape was labeled. The voice wasn't Owen's. It was older, rougher, with the clipped vowels of a different era. He played another tape. 1967, different voice, same format, a car accident on the county road, 3 teenagers dead, date matching the label. 1982, another voice, another disaster, another perfect prediction. Owen went through a dozen tapes, 2 dozen, pulling them at random from different decades. The voices changed. Different people, different eras, different styles, but the format was always the same. A newscast, a disaster, a date, and then he hit the 90s. 1997, he threaded the tape, hit play. His own voice came out of the speakers. This is KDRK 12:40 a.m. with a severe weather update. Owen stopped the tape. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely work the controls. He checked the label. October 1997. He would have been 4 years old. He hadn't even known this station existed. He played another tape from 97. His voice again. Another from 2003. His voice, 2015. His voice. Every tape from the last 30 years was him. Owen climbed out of the basement at 4 in the morning, covered in dust, his mind reeling. He sat down at the main console and stared at the equipment, at the board, at the microphone that had been there since 1952. He hadn't made those recordings. He couldn't have. Some of them were from before he was born, but the voice was his, unmistakably, undeniably his. Which meant either someone had found a way to perfectly replicate his voice decades before he existed, or the tapes weren't recordings of the past at all. They were recordings of the future, sent backward, bleeding through from somewhere ahead. and Owen was somehow always the one making them. He thought about the December 3rd tape, his voice, broken and sorry, describing 30 people dead in downtown Derrick. If the pattern held, he was going to make that recording. Sometime in the next 6 weeks, he was going to sit in this booth and record a broadcast about a disaster he couldn't prevent. Unless he could prevent it. Unless this time, knowing what was coming, he could actually stop it. Owen spent the next 4 weeks trying to figure out what was going to happen on December 3rd. He listened to the tape over and over, analyzing every word, every pause, every background noise. He played it so many times he could recite it from memory. The broadcast mentioned Main Street and 4th Avenue, the intersection at the center of downtown. It mentioned 30 dead. It mentioned witnesses, but it didn't say what caused it. No explosion. No fire, no crash, just mass casualty event and cause unknown. He started keeping notes, bought a notebook from the dollar store and filled it with theories, each one more desperate than the last. Gas leak? Possible, but the gas company had just done their annual inspection. Building collapse? He checked the permit records, nothing downtown was old enough or unstable enough to be a risk. Terrorist attack? In Derrick, Kansas? The town was so small that most terrorists probably couldn't find it on a map. He started watching the intersection. Spent his days parked in different spots around downtown, rotating between the coffee shop and the bank and the little park on the corner where old men played checkers and complained about the government. He watched the buildings, watched the people, watched for anything that seemed wrong, anything that didn't fit, anything that might explain how 30 people could die in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. He found nothing. The intersection looked the same as it always had. The buildings were old but stable brick and mortar that had survived 50 years of Kansas weather. The church on the corner had been there since the town was founded. The bank across the street had new windows installed just last year. There was no construction, no obvious hazards, nothing that screamed impending disaster. He tried warning people, went to the sheriff's office on a Monday afternoon and told Deputy Martinez he had reason to believe something bad was going to happen downtown on December 3rd. The deputy listened politely, took notes, asked how Owen knew this information. When Owen couldn't give him a real answer, couldn't say, "I heard it on a tape from the future that I found in the basement of a radio station," the deputy thanked him for his concern and showed him the door. Owen could hear them laughing before he even made it to his car. He called the fire department, got transferred 3 times before someone told him they couldn't investigate potential emergencies based on anonymous tips without specific information about the nature of the threat. He called the city council office. The receptionist told him the council members were very busy and perhaps he could submit his concerns in writing to be reviewed at the next public meeting in January. He called the local newspaper the Derrick Dispatch, circulation 3,000 on a good day, and the editor told him they didn't have resources to investigate vague premonitions. Nobody listened. Nobody believed him. He was just the overnight DJ at the dying AM station, the burnout who'd come crawling back to Derrick after his life fell apart in Kansas City, the guy who talked to himself in the booth and probably drank too much, and definitely seemed like the kind of person who might have a breakdown and start predicting disasters that weren't going to happen. Owen understood their position. If someone had come to him with this story 6 months ago, he wouldn't have believed them either. The days counted down. November bled into December. Owen stopped sleeping more than a few hours at a time, stopped eating regular meals, stopped doing anything except watching the intersection and listening to the tape and trying to find a way to stop something he didn't understand. December 2nd, 1 day left. Owen was sitting in the booth at 2 in the morning, staring at the console, when the lights started flickering again. The same slow pulse as before, the fluorescence dimming and brightening like something breathing, the equipment humming lower, then higher, then lower again. The air tasting like pennies and something else, something burnt, something wrong. And then the broadcast booth filled with static. Not from the speakers, from everywhere. The air itself seemed to crackle, seemed to hiss, seemed to vibrate at a frequency just below hearing. Owen felt it in his teeth, in his bones, in the soft tissue behind his eyes. The fluorescent lights overhead weren't just flickering anymore, they were pulsing in rhythm with something, some heartbeat that had nothing to do with the electrical system. The temperature dropped. Owen could see his breath fogging in the air. Frost crept across the inside of the window, forming patterns that looked almost like words in a language he didn't recognize. The microphone clicked on by itself. Owen stared at it. The on-air light was glowing red. The levels on the board were jumping even though no one was speaking, the needles slamming into the red zone over and over. Something was broadcasting, but it wasn't him. The equipment started to shake. The console, the chairs, the coffee mug on the desk, rattling against the wood until it toppled over and shattered on the floor. Owen grabbed the edge of the board to steady himself, and for a moment he thought he could feel something through the metal, a pulse, a rhythm, a signal trying to push its way through. Then the static cleared, and he heard voices. Not one voice, dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands, all speaking at once, overlapping, layering on top of each other in a cacophony that was almost musical, almost beautiful, almost enough to make you want to lean closer and listen forever. They were saying words, but the words didn't make sense, fragments of sentences, pieces of conversations, broadcasts from different times, all bleeding together into a single impossible sound. The National Weather Service has issued, "Fatal accident on highway. At least 30 dead in what authorities are calling. Stay tuned for further. This is KDRK 1240 AM, your voice in the... I'm sorry, I tried to warn them. I tried to. Don't stop broadcasting. Don't ever stop. They're listening. They're always listening." Owen reached for the board, trying to cut the signal, trying to shut it down. His hand touched the console and pain shot up his arm, bright and electric, like grabbing a live wire. He yanked his hand back. The lights flickered harder. The static grew louder. The voices multiplied, screaming now, a chorus of every disaster that had ever been and every disaster that was still coming. And then, cutting through all of it, one voice, clear and calm and unmistakably his own. "Owen." The static stopped. The lights went steady. The voices vanished. Owen sat in the sudden silence, breathing hard, his hand still tingling from the shock. "Owen," the voice said again. It was coming from the speakers now, from the monitors, from everywhere and nowhere. "You need to listen to me. I don't have much time." "Who?" Owen's voice cracked. "Who is this?" "You know who this is. You've been listening to me for weeks. You've been trying to stop what's coming, but you can't. Not the way you've been trying. The December 3rd broadcast, the 30 people. How do I stop it?" A pause. When the voice spoke again, it sounded tired, old, like something that had been carrying a weight for longer than Owen could imagine. "You don't," it said. "That's not how this works. The tapes don't predict the future, Owen. They're not warnings. They're not prophecies. They're echoes. Signals bleeding through from a frequency that exists between what is and what will be, and something on that frequency has been listening for a very long time." "What do you mean? What's been listening?" "I don't know what to call them. I've been doing this for 70 years and I still don't have a name that fits. But they're out there, in the static, in the spaces between stations. They've been trying to get through since the first broadcast towers went up. Radio opened a door, Owen, and the only thing keeping it from swinging wide open is the signal." "The signal?" "Us. The broadcasts. As long as someone's talking into the void, as long as someone's filling the frequency with human voices, they can't come through. They can hear us, but they can't reach us. The tapes, the predictions, that's them pushing against the door, testing it, showing us what they can see on the other side. They know what's coming because they're outside of time the way we understand it. They can see all of it at once. Owen's head was spinning. None of this made sense. But then again, none of the last 6 weeks had made sense either. So the disasters on the tapes, they're not caused by the tapes? No, they're just things that are going to happen. Bad things happen all the time. The tapes are the things on the other side showing us they can see it coming, proving they're watching. And every time one of their predictions comes true, more people start to doubt, start to wonder if maybe they should stop broadcasting, stop filling the airwaves with noise. And that's what they want, Owen. Silence, emptiness, a frequency with nothing on it but them. Why me? Why am I the one on all the tapes? Another pause, longer this time. Because you're the one who's here. You're the one who sits in this booth night after night, talking into the dark, filling the space between stations with something human. They've been listening to you for years, Owen. Decades. Time doesn't work for them the way it works for us. To them, you've always been here. You always will be. You're the voice that keeps the door closed. Owen looked at the microphone. The on-air light was still glowing red. What happens on December 3rd? He asked. The 30 people. Is there any way to stop it? No. Some things are fixed. Some things happen no matter what. But that's not the point, Owen. The point is what comes after. The point is whether you keep broadcasting. I don't understand. You will. After tomorrow, you'll understand everything. And when you do, you'll have a choice. You can walk away, turn off the transmitter, let the silence win, or you can stay. Keep talking. Keep the door closed for another 70 years and hope the next person who sits in this chair understands what's at stake. The static started to creep back in at the edges of the sound. The voice was fading. Wait, Owen said. Wait, I still have questions. I know, I had questions too. But time's up. They're pushing harder now. They know you know. Tomorrow's going to be bad, Owen. Really bad. But whatever happens, whatever you see, remember, don't stop broadcasting. It's the only thing keeping them out. The static swelled, the lights flickered one final time, and then silence. Owen sat in the empty booth for a long time, staring at the microphone, thinking about doors and frequencies and things that lived in the spaces between stations. Then he pulled up to the console and started talking. He didn't know what else to do, so he did the only thing he knew how to do. He filled the silence with his voice. He talked about nothing and everything, the weather, the town, the way the streets looked at 2 a.m. when no one was awake. He read farm reports and played music and took calls from Leonard about chemtrails and didn't argue with a single word. He broadcast until dawn, and when the sun came up, he went home and didn't sleep. December 3rd. Owen drove downtown at 5 a.m. and parked at the intersection of Main Street and 4th Avenue. He didn't know what he was looking for. He just knew he had to be there. The day started normal. Shops opened. People came and went. Cars passed through the intersection without incident. By noon, Owen was starting to wonder if maybe, somehow, the tape had been wrong. Maybe his presence here had changed something. Maybe this time would be different. At 2:30 p.m., the First Methodist Church on 4th Avenue exploded. Not fire, not gas. The building simply came apart like something had reached up from underneath and torn it open from the inside. Owen heard it before he saw it, a sound like the earth itself groaning, a bass rumble so deep it vibrated in his chest. Then the ground buckled, the sidewalk cracked, and the church began to die. The steeple went first. It split down the middle with a crack like a rifle shot, the two halves peeling apart and collapsing inward, dragging the bell down with them. The bell rang once, a single, mournful note, and then disappeared into the dust. The walls came next. They didn't fall outward the way walls should when a building collapses. They bulged, swelled, like something was pressing against them from inside, something too big for the space it was trapped in. Then the bricks exploded outward in all directions, spraying across the intersection like shrapnel from a bomb. Owen saw a chunk of masonry the size of a basketball take out a car windshield 50 feet away. Saw another piece catch a man running across the street, spinning him around, dropping him to the pavement in a heap that didn't move. The stained glass windows, the ones that had been there for 100 years, the ones that showed Jesus and the disciples and the resurrection, shattered into a million colored pieces that rained down on the street like confetti at the world's worst parade. People were screaming, running. Some of them were bleeding from wounds they hadn't noticed yet. Some of them weren't moving at all. Owen ran toward the church. He didn't think about it. He just moved. The building was still collapsing, pieces of the roof coming down in sections, dust and debris filling the air so thick he could barely see. The smell was overwhelming, old wood and plaster and something else, something that reminded him of the static in the booth, that penny taste, that wrongness. Through the haze, Owen could see bodies. The church had been holding a funeral. He could see the flowers scattered across the rubble, the casket cracked open and empty, the folding chairs bent and broken like dead insects. People were buried under the debris. Some of them were screaming, some of them had stopped. He grabbed a man by the arm and pulled him out of a pile of broken pews. The man's leg was bent at the knee in a direction knees don't bend. Owen dragged him to the sidewalk and went back for more. A woman, a teenager, an old man in a suit who was probably here for the funeral. Owen pulled them out one by one, not thinking about anything except the next person, the next body, the next life he might be able to save. His hands were bleeding, torn up by broken glass and splintered wood. His lungs were full of dust. His eyes were streaming. He found a woman pinned under a fallen beam. She was alive, conscious, looking up at him with eyes that were already going glassy from shock. Her chest was compressed under the weight, her breathing shallow and wet-sounding. "It came from below," she whispered. Blood bubbled at the corner of her mouth. "Something came from below. I felt it. Under the floor. Under everything. It wanted out." Owen didn't understand. He pulled at the beam, trying to free her. The wood groaned but didn't move. He pulled harder. His arms were shaking. His back was screaming. The woman's eyes rolled back in her head and her breathing got slower, wetter, the sound of lungs filling with blood. And then he felt it. Something in the air. A pressure, a frequency. The same feeling he'd had in the booth when the static came, when the voices bled through, when the lights flickered like something breathing. But stronger here, closer. Like the signal wasn't coming through speakers anymore, it was coming through the ground itself. He looked down at the floor of the ruined church, at the foundation, at the cracks in the concrete that spread out from the center of the collapse like the roots of some terrible tree. There was something in the cracks. Not rubble, not shadows, something else. Something that moved without moving, that pulsed without pulsing, that existed in the space between what Owen could see and what his brain could process. It was dark, but it wasn't darkness, it was an absence, a void, a hole in the world where something else was trying to push through. The static sound came from everywhere at once, from the cracks, from the air, from inside Owen's own skull. And for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, Owen saw something in that void, something with too many angles, something that was looking back at him, something that had been waiting on the other side of a door that was now cracked just wide enough to peek through. The woman under the beam stopped breathing. Owen let go and ran. He didn't stop until he was back at the station. The final count was 32 dead, 32 people who had gone to a funeral and never came home. The official explanation was structural failure, old building, poor maintenance, a foundation that had finally given out after 100 years. Owen knew better, but he couldn't prove it, and even if he could, who would believe him? He sat in the booth that night and stared at the microphone for a long time. The on-air light was off. The transmitter was silent. For the first time in 70 years, KDRK wasn't broadcasting. Owen could feel them, out there in the static, in the spaces between frequencies, waiting, listening, pushing against a door that had been cracked open just a little bit wider. He thought about the voice he'd heard, the warning, "Don't stop broadcasting. It's the only thing keeping them out." He thought about Dale Wexler, dead in a ditch because Owen had tried to save him. He thought about the Henderson family, alive because he'd made a different choice. He thought about 32 people in a church, killed by something that had reached up through a crack in the world. He couldn't save everyone. He knew that now. Some things were going to happen no matter what he did. But maybe he could keep the door from opening any wider. Owen reached out and flipped the transmitter switch. The equipment hummed to life. The Owen air light glowed red. He leaned into the microphone. "Good evening," he said. "This is KDRK, 12:40 a.m. Owen Tate here, coming to you live from the booth, filling the silence with whatever noise I can make. It's going to be a long night, folks. It's going to be a lot of long nights, but I'll be here. I'll always be here. And as long as I'm talking, as long as someone's filling this frequency with something human, we're going to be okay." He paused, took a breath, felt the static pressing against the edges of the signal, hungry and patient. "So stay tuned," he said. "We've got a lot of time to fill, and I'm not going anywhere." He hit play on the automated playlist. The music started some old country song from the 50s, something about love lost and roads not taken. Owen listened to it for a moment, letting the melody wash over him, letting it fill the silence that pressed against the windows and crept through the cracks in the walls. He thought about his ex-wife, probably asleep right now in the apartment they used to share in Kansas City. Thought about his parents, dead and gone, buried in the cemetery on the hill outside town. Thought about Dale Wexler and the Hendersons and the 32 people who died in a church basement when something from the other side found a crack big enough to reach through. He thought about all the nights ahead of him, thousands of them. Decades of sitting in this chair, talking into this microphone, filling the frequency with something human because that was the only thing standing between the world and whatever lived in the static. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It wasn't the life anyone would choose, but it was his now. And there was something almost peaceful about that, about knowing exactly what you were supposed to do, even if the reason was terrifying. The song ended. Another one started. Owen reached for the coffee pot and poured himself a cup that had been sitting too long, and was probably more battery acid than caffeine at this point. He drank it anyway. He had a lot of long nights ahead of him, and the coffee wasn't going to drink itself. Outside, the stars were bright and cold and impossibly far away. Somewhere out there, in the spaces between frequencies, something was listening. Something was always listening. But as long as Owen kept talking, it couldn't do anything but wait. He settled back in the chair that had been uncomfortable since Eisenhower was president and prepared to do the only thing that mattered. He kept broadcasting. 3 weeks later, Owen found a new tape in the basement. It was sitting on top of the oldest box, right where he couldn't miss it. The label was dated 50 years in the future. The handwriting was shaky, but he recognized it. It was his. He didn't play it. He wasn't sure he ever would. Some things were better left unknown. Some doors were better left closed. But he kept it. Put it in the do not air box with the others, a message from a future he might never see to a past that was already gone. And every night, he sat in the booth and filled the silence with his voice, because that's what the job was now, That's what it had always been. Not just playing music and reading farm reports and talking to Leonard about chemtrails, keeping the door closed, holding back the static, making sure that whatever was out there in the frequencies between stations never found a silence wide enough to slip through. Owen Tate broadcast for another 47 years. He never married again, never left Derrick, never took a vacation or a sick day or even a single night off. The station manager position opened up when Meredith died in 2009, and Owen took it, but he never stopped doing the overnight shift. Couldn't, wouldn't. The silence was too dangerous to leave unattended. He trained 3 successors over the decades, showed them the basement, played them the tapes. 2 of them quit within a week, couldn't handle the truth, couldn't accept that the job was bigger than reading farm reports and playing oldies. The 3rd one stayed for 6 months before she had a breakdown and moved to Oregon. Owen understood. It wasn't a burden everyone could carry. Some nights, when the static pressed close and the voices bled through and the lights flickered in that slow breathing rhythm, he wasn't sure he could carry it either. But he did. Night after night, year after year, filling the silence with his voice because someone had to. He got letters sometimes, emails, later, people who'd heard the overnight broadcast, who'd felt something in the static that they couldn't explain, who wanted to know if the voice on the radio was real or if they'd imagined it. Owen always wrote back, always told them the same thing. Keep listening. Stay tuned. As long as someone's out there hearing the signal, we're all going to be okay. He wasn't sure if that was true, but it felt true enough to say. When he finally died peacefully in his sleep, at the age of 78, they found a tape in his desk drawer. The label was dated one day in the future. The recording was 3 words long. It's your turn. The new overnight DJ found the tape the next night. She played it. She heard Owen's voice, and then she found the basement, and the boxes, and the truth about what KDRK really was. Her name was Maria Santos. She was 26 years old, recently divorced, working the overnight shift because it was the only job she could find in a town she'd moved to for reasons she was still trying to understand. She had a lot of long nights ahead of her. She picked up the microphone. The on-air light glowed red. "Good evening," she said. "This is KDRK 1240 AM. Maria Santos here, coming to you live from the booth. It's going to be a long night, folks, but I'll be here. I'll always be here." The static pressed against the edges of the signal, hungry, patient, waiting. But the signal held, and somewhere in the space between frequencies, something old and patient and vast turned its attention elsewhere, looking for a silence that didn't exist. Not tonight. Not as long as someone kept talking. But that's another story. Folklore note. The phenomenon of anomalous radio signals has been documented since the earliest days of broadcasting. In 1923, researchers at the Marconi Company reported receiving transmissions that appeared to originate from no identifiable source, voices speaking in languages that didn't exist. Music that matched no known recordings, broadcasts dated years or decades in the future. The lead researcher, a man named Harold Worthington, kept a detailed journal of these occurrences. He described the signals as bleeding through from somewhere adjacent to our reality, and theorized that radio waves might be capable of penetrating barriers that physical matter could not. His journal was found after his death in 1931, sealed in a metal box in his basement. The final entry simply read, "They can hear us. They have always been able to hear us. The only question is whether we have been smart enough to keep them listening." The signals were dismissed by the scientific establishment as atmospheric interference, equipment malfunction, or hoax, but the reports never stopped. Over the following century, radio operators around the world documented similar experiences. Voices bleeding through from frequencies that shouldn't exist, broadcasts that predicted events before they happened, transmissions that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Numbers stations are perhaps the most famous example of unexplained radio phenomena. These shortwave broadcasts, which typically feature synthesized voices reading seemingly random sequences of numbers, have been recorded on every continent since at least the 1950s. Governments have generally attributed them to espionage communications, but several documented stations have never been claimed by any nation, and their broadcasts follow patterns that don't match any known encryption methodology. Some researchers have noted that the timing of certain numbers station broadcasts correlates with unusual events, power fluctuations, equipment malfunctions, unexplained deaths in the areas where they can be received most clearly. The most famous case is the so-called Swedish Rhapsody numbers station, which broadcasts seemingly random sequences of numbers and a haunting music box melody from 1957 until 2008. Despite extensive investigation by amateur radio enthusiasts and at least 3 government intelligence agencies, no one ever identified its source or purpose. The station's final broadcast, on June 23, 2008, contained no numbers at all, just 11 minutes of silence, followed by a single phrase in heavily accented English. "Thank you for listening. The door is closed." In 1994, a small AM station in rural Kansas reported receiving a series of anomalous broadcasts that appeared to predict local events with perfect accuracy. The station manager at the time, a woman named Meredith Callahan, who would later run the station for another 15 years, dismissed the recordings as a prank. They were never aired. The tapes disappeared into the station's archives and were never mentioned in any official documentation. Callahan died in 2009 at the age of 77. In her will, she left the station to her overnight DJ, a man named Owen Tate, along with a sealed envelope containing a single sheet of paper. The contents of that paper have never been made public, but Tate continued to run the station until his own death in 2041, never missing a single night on the air. The station KDRK 1240 AM is still broadcasting today. It operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without interruption. In its more than 70-year history, it has never once gone off the air. Some signals are more important than they seem, and some silences are more dangerous than anyone knows. Well, boys and ghouls, that wraps up another terrorific tale from the vault. Poor Owen. Thought he could warn people, thought he could save them, thought maybe, just maybe, if he tried hard enough, he could change what was coming. And you know what? Sometimes he could. The Hendersons are still alive because of him, but Dale Wexler? Dale's decorating a drainage culvert because Owen tried too hard. 32 people in a church basement? Well, some doors just want to open, I guess. But here's the real kicker: Owen didn't get to walk away. No retirement, no escape, no "thanks for your service, enjoy your pension." 47 years in that booth, talking into the void, keeping the door closed one broadcast at a time. That's not a job, that's a sentence. And now poor Maria Santos gets to do the same thing until she dies in the chair. Just how we love it. If this story made you think twice about that late-night static on the radio, hit that subscribe button. New Creature features drop every single night at 8 p.m. Central, and trust me, tomorrow's got its own frequency of fear. Leave a like if you're never turning your radio dial again, and drop a comment. Where are you listening from tonight? You ever hear something strange in the static? Voices that shouldn't be there? I'm always hunting for the next nightmare. Remember, every frequency has something on it. Some of them play music, some of them play news, and some of them are the only thing standing between you and whatever's been waiting in the silence since the first tower went up. Until next time, kiddies, keep your radios on and your signals strong. This has been your late night creature feature. I'm Mr. Wendigo, and something out there is always listening.